Hello everyone, Michigan Railfan 57 here. Merry Christmas! This video will be very different from the rest of my videos, as instead of real trains, we'll be taking a look at Lego built trains. Now, most of you probably didn't know that I had any Lego trains. The only way you'd be able to tell is from the description in my channel. However, I would like to change that, and so my Christmas gift to you all will be finally showing you my collection. Before we begin, I will go over how the video is laid out. This will be split into 5 sections, with the first being non-powered models, then powered models, rolling stock, scrapped models, and a running session. I will use the term MOC often, which for all you non-LEGO modelers stands for my own creation. I will also use the term 6 stud or 8 stud, which just means how many studs wide the model is. Here's a picture explaining the studs. Anyways, on to the video. Starting out with non-powered models, or dummy units, we have an 040T numbered 21, named Eliza. This engine was built using the boiler from a holiday train and recolored to red. It used to have a simpler valve gear, but I upgraded it a while ago to have a more realistic Stevenson valve gear. The front half of the engine is 8 studs wide, however, the cab and bunker are 6 studs. I plan on upgrading the engine to be completely 8 studs wide eventually. Nevertheless, it is probably my best running dummy unit, as the short wheelbase and simple design allow it to take curves very well. Next up, we have my only geared locomotive, and currently my only completely 6 stud wide engine. This is my 2-truck Climax locomotive. I built this engine a few years ago as I wanted to make a geared engine, and Climax engines are my favorite type. The engine used to have longer rods and ran a lot better than it does now. This thing barely works, unfortunately, as it jams up frequently, so I don't use it much. However, I do have plans to convert it to 8 studs wide, so hopefully that will fix its jamming problem. You won't be seeing this engine running in the running session due to its jamming problem. Third, we have an incomplete 040. This engine is currently a work in progress, as most of my MOCs are. This engine was originally a 6 stud wide 060T, however, it was built very poorly, so I decided to rebuild it into a normal 060. While it worked, I felt it was way too short, and the tender was still 6 studs wide while the rest of the engine was 8 studs. Because of this, I rebuilt it again. So far, the basic shell of the engine is complete, however, I need to craft a new tender for it, as I stole its tender for another engine you'll see later. Finally, we have a somewhat famous engine, a 440. You'll know this engine if you live in Michigan and if you've ever been to Greenfield Village. It's none other than Weiser Railroad No. 1, better known as the Edison. This model is a bit large in scale compared to the others, which is a similar trait to my other Greenfield Village MOC. My Edison MOC was first built in late 2023 out of parts from a knockoff Lego train set. I didn't like how it looked, so I rebuilt it in early 2024 with a new cab, accurate cylinders, and smaller leading wheels, much like the real Edison. Present-day upgrades include a new, more accurate tender, a longer boiler, a new smoke box, a new pilot design, and some of Edison's brass on the cylinders. Even with all of these additions, Edison is still very incomplete, as I need more gold pieces to represent the rest of the brass on it, as well as handrails, walkways, and the air compressor, which this model is lacking at the moment. Despite all these, I'm still very proud of it. Now, we begin the fun part. These are the models in my collection that can move under their own power. Let's begin. The first model I'll feature is this 280 Camelback locomotive. This is my most recent MOC to date, but it still has some history. I originally wanted the engine to be a 210 Decapod, and I actually built it as one, but it didn't take curves very well due to the long wheelbase, even with blind drivers. As a result, I decided to make it a 280 Consolidation instead. I went with a Camelback design as one of my oldest MOCs was a Camelback made from the locomotive from the Toy Story set, so I wanted to pay homage to it, as well as finally make a working Camelback, as the Toy Story MOC was very poorly made. This engine is unfortunately not going to stay a Camelback, which is why it has little to no detail. I plan on remaking it into another 280, but you'll have to wait and see what my plans are for it. Next, we have the most changed engine in my collection, and easily my second favorite. This is my 260 Mogul engine, numbered 47 and named Jacob. This engine was originally the locomotive featured in the Lone Ranger train set, and it was one of my first LEGO trains. I loved it. At some point in time, I took it apart and combined it with the 2018 Hogwarts Express engine to make a poorly made 2662 Mallet. Eventually, the Mallet was so poorly made I decided it wasn't worth saving and scrapped it. In 2023, I decided to try and make another MOC out of the remains of the Mallet, and soon, Jacob was born. It utilized the boiler from the Lone Ranger engine and a modified 8-stud wide cab. The tender was 6 studs wide still, and the model had no motor. It was just a dummy unit. Later in the year, I recolored the boiler black and gray to make the model look more realistic. The model stayed like this for a while until I tried to motorize it. While my attempt worked, the model looked rather ugly, as the boiler couldn't cover the motor and the walkways had a brick under them to cover it. Eventually, I redid it again, but this time I put the motor in the tender, leaving room for me to detail the engine. Around this time, the engine got its long wheelbase, and I eventually lengthened the boiler and added white lining on the walkways and the underside of the cabin tender, as well as an actual leading truck, and that's where we are today with the MOC. There are some details that I would like to add, such as handrails, an air compressor, and a new bell, but otherwise, this MOC is mostly complete, and I have no plans to make it into anything else. Finally, we come to my final powered MOC, the magnum opus of my collection, my baby, my precious. If you break it, I will kill you. This is the one and only, the last Mason Bogey, Calumet and Hecla Mining No. 3, Torch Lake. Of course I have a Torch Lake MOC. If I'm shown talking through a poorly drawn digital drawing of Torch Lake, I have to have a Lego model of it. Let's get into it. My MOC of Torch Lake used to look very bad. It started out as a cobbled together 6-stud wide Mason Bogey of the same wheel arrangement. It looked nothing like Torch Lake, but it was a start. Over time, as my interest in Torch Lake grew, I decided to make this poor excuse of a model into something decent. I redid almost everything in the model and made it a hand-drawn number plate, which still resides on the model today. Now, it started to look like Torch Lake, but it still looked quite rough. After going to Greenfield Village in mid-2024 and seeing Torch Lake in person for the first time since 2019, I went back to my model and decided to improve it. The end result looked like this. It now featured gold handrails, a better cabin bunker, and much more detail. I upgraded the model yet again in September to have more accurate domes and better valve gear, as well as stealing Jacob's bell. My latest upgrade to Torch Lake was some new windows and the addition of a motor. The battery box is still quite visible, but I plan on making a coal load to cover it up. Some things I would like to redo or add are the front footboard, as it looks very blocky compared to real life, as well as more accurate windows, and fixing the problem with its wheels where they will sometimes lock up for a little bit when it's running. Other than these small kinks, Torch Lake is complete. To finish off the MOCs, here's one awaiting parts to be finished. I wonder what that'll be. Now we move on to rolling stock. Most of my rolling stock is very generic, but I do have some MOCs. Starting off, we have my 2 passenger cars. They were built from a knockoff Hogwarts Express set using several components, mostly the windows. The observation car is very similar, just with a platform at the end. Both of these cars don't have interiors yet, but I do plan on adding them eventually. Next, we have this generic flat car, not based on anything in particular. It's 8 studs wide and gray, that's about it. After that, we have this generic caboose that's also 8 studs wide. I made this a few months ago, so it's one of my more recent MOCs. Similar to the passenger cars, I plan on giving this guy an interior as well. Finally, here's an 8-stud base that's a work in progress. I plan to make this into a boxcar. Finishing off the rolling stock, we'll speed run through my 6-stud stuff. 3, 2, 1, go! Gondola from knockoff Lego set. Plan on upgrading to 8 studs wide. Center press flat car also may convert to 8 stud. Generic black flat car will probably be a base for a new car. What appears to be a small intermodal flat car will probably be scrapped. And with that, I've shown off all my present day stuff. Now time to see some scrapped MOCs that weren't rebuilt and instead used as parts. Starting off, we have another mogul, number 36. This engine was built from the other half of the scrapped Mallet and alongside Jacob. I kept this around for a while until realizing I didn't have a purpose for it, so I scrapped it to supply parts for the camel bag. Next, we have my only diesel MOC. This is a pitiful attempt at a CSX SD40-2. I never liked the model, so it was scrapped. And finally, we have this 060 locomotive. This was modified from the LEGO 40th Anniversary 7810 locomotive, equipped with the headlight from the Lone Ranger 460, and several other features to make it look more American. This model was scrapped recently as I didn't quite like how it turned out. And there we have it, all my LEGO train MOCs. Now that the showcase is done, it's time for a running session under the Christmas tree.